There is a theme here, definitely in this secondary markets across sports. We can invest in the operating company, and that's the team. The pairing of that with the PropCo side it really turned into this 1 + 1 = 3.
All right, we are back for another episode of Under the Number. Today, I'm joined by Kyle Israel, managing partner of the newly launched Momentous Sports. Kyle, thanks so much for joining me.
Brent, thanks for having me. Excited to join the roster of incredible guests that you've had in the past. So very excited to be here today.
Awesome. So Momentous was announced just in September, and it is a product of the Magnolia Hill Family Office Group, or an extension. And the collective that you have put together includes people like John Elway, Tim Tebow, Blake Bortles. I know Andrew Cathy from Chick-fil-A is adjacent, involved. How did that collective come to be?
It's a really good question. I think organically is probably, the first and foremost answer, and I can get into some of those details. John Elway, who, I still, pinch myself a little bit to have him as a partner and an investor. First of all, just an incredible human being. But he was he's the reason I wore number 7. So it's been quite unique to now be partnered with John. But John and his principal, Bobby Hennebree, who does a lot of the work from the family office side for John, we're actually investors in Peregrine Digital Infrastructure, which is our data center subsidiary underneath the Magnolia umbrella. And so we established a relationship with Bobby. They made the investment there. And as we continued to work on Momentous, the way that they see the world and want to continue to participate in sports investments, they decided to join along as a partner and investor with us there. Tim Tebow was already our partner in Sporting Jacks, which is a men's USL Championship soccer team, a women's USL Super League soccer team, and we have a 12,000 athlete soccer academy in Jacksonville, Florida. We'll be developing a 15,000 seat stadium on about 80 or so acres of real estate. And so we were already partners with Tim in that investment. And then as we decided to formally launch Momentous and approach this space that we're focused on, team ownership and real estate, thematically and through a platform, Tim and his team decided that they wanted to be part of that. And so very thankful to have them on board. Obviously, Tim is an incredible human being, goes without saying, but just a very, very sharp businessman, in addition to all the incredible philanthropic work that he does. And then Blake is a friend of mine. Both of us were quarterbacks at UCF. I was there, I don't know, 5 or 6 years prior to him being there, actually really 2 or 3 from when I left. And, Blake was in that interesting stage of his career where, his football days were wrapped up. He started a family. He has 3 kids now. And he was kind of looking for what's next other than the golf course. And so I approached Blake and said, hey, are you interested in joining the Momentous team? Here's what our focus is. Here's how you can get involved. And he wanted to be involved and an active partner. So there was no real hey, let's put a bunch of quarterbacks together. It was more super organic. It just worked out from a timing perspective. And obviously it's been a force multiplier for us from a brand launch. And those guys, in addition to Andy Cathy, CEO of Chick-fil-A, and Blake Goodman from Four Stones, they've been an incredible partner. They bring a serious additional value add from a master development perspective with their work at Four Stone. And then Scott Friedman is the 5th partner. Scott was the president of Robinhood and a very early employee at Robinhood. And as the world of tokenization in hard assets continues to grow and expand, there was a level of interest from Scott in joining us because of that element and focusing there. So we're very fortunate. We're very humbled. We don't take it lightly that we have partners like that. And they're all great human beings, which is most important.
Well, it certainly sounds like those guys will be strategic partners for the long haul, like you mentioned, beyond just having a splashy launch. That sounds like a group of Avengers to really differentiate you guys on the.
It's a good way to frame it.
I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I've heard you describe part of the model for Momentous has to do with OpCo and PropCo, operating companies and property companies. Can you break that down for me?
Yeah, it's a great question. And let me rewind a little bit into how we even arrived there.
Sure.
When I joined the family office 3 years ago, at the time the firm was investing fairly agnostically, always a lean towards commercial real estate and institutional commercial real estate. Our patriarch, John Shane, and our CEO, Marley Hughes, have significant experience in that space. And so, there was always we're going to place bets elsewhere, but were very drawn to commercial real estate. One of those early investments that they made, or one of the investments they made, was into a startup that I co-founded called Nestry, focused on fitness from the neck up, essentially training the brain like a muscle and using emerging and existing technology to do that. And so that was my introduction really to Marley and to John Shane, was through their investment into Nestry. I won't go down the rabbit hole of life and how I ended up here in Berlin, Germany, which is love and for my family. But as I spun out of Nestry in my day-to-day capacity, he said, "Hey, Kyle, we're starting to see sports deals. We're not necessarily the guys that want to have our name in the lights. We're not necessarily, guys that need to have this vanity asset. But will you come and help us take a deeper look?" And so I joined joined the firm and looked at various deals across the globe. A lot of that soccer, a lot of that kind of the big four leagues, Championship and Premier League here in Europe. And it was interesting initially. A lot of people that were investing into sports teams, especially at the big four level, were basically saying, and this is very simplified, there's always going to kind of be this up and to the right from an enterprise value perspective, just because of the scarcity of the assets.
Mm.
And that's nice and that works. But for us, we've always been looking for more of the value add opportunities. Where can we really roll up our sleeves and get active and get involved and add value? And for us, a lot of that is on the propco side, the larger real estate developments. And over time, we started to see more and more deals. The first deal that really caught our attention was out in Albuquerque, New Mexico, with New Mexico United. In that case, they were playing in a AAA baseball stadium, and there was going to be a massive revenue unlock and enterprise value unlock if they could get into their own stadium, control that stadium, control the schedule, et cetera. And then they continued to mature. There was more opportunities where it wasn't just the stadium, but it was own the team, own the stadium, and then develop and own the mixed use real estate around the stadium. And that's probably the point in time after making the investment into Sporting Jacks that we said, you know what, there is a theme here, definitely in this middle market of sports, the secondary markets across sports, really unique secondary markets, where we can invest in the operating company. In many cases, in most cases, in all cases, that's the team component. Now in Jacksonville, there's three operating companies, and there may be more over time, various different sports, different academies, et cetera. But it's the pairing of that with the propco side, think Stadco or Stadium, and the mixed use real estate around it,
Mm-hmm.
that really turned into this 1+1 = 3. So the way that we show up is we invest into the topco, typically giving us full exposure to really both the opco and propco. It varies project to project, but then we can write another check into a position that we're basically always pursuing, which is a co-GP in the propco side, or the real estate development. And from that side, we help on the master development elements, the stadium development elements, and probably most importantly, the capital formation side of that, the equity, the debt components, the public-private relationships. But we out of our fund will not be making investments into anything that does not have the opco and the propco and an ability to participate with checks into both.
I am gonna have to follow up on the Berlin situation, so that'll come later on.
Sure.
But that was a great explanation. So it is very interesting, the change, and it's very pronounced right now, but it's been building over time. This shift from sports, where for the longest time, sports team ownership in particular was viewed as like a rich man's trophy or vanity asset, or potentially a tax advantaged investment move.
Sure.
Whereas now that is simply no longer the case. Talk about some of the kind of convergence of trends that has made this so appealing to groups like yours.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Number one, I think there's been a lot of emerging sports, expansion leagues, different takes on sports. Think of Unrivaled and 3-on-3 women's basketball that I think started to bring a lot more eyeballs to sports as an asset class generally. You started to see, and I'm going to step away from like the big four leagues, big five leagues with the MLS and the US for a second here. You started to see a lot of American investment, seeing the asset class of European soccer, you know, let's say below the Premier League, as an investable asset, and more Americans moving over to participate in the various leagues and countries over here. I think that trend was something that became very noticeable, and you saw some really large private equity firms making huge investments over here that kind of brought people's attention essentially to it. And then it's been building over time. I think there was a lot of focus on soccer right after, I think it was the 97 World Cup, the Women's World Cup that was in the US, where soccer started to become more relevant and more prevalent. And obviously most people today in the US think of the MLS as the premier soccer league. And today, rightfully so, it is from all the core metric components. But the USL, so the second division of soccer in the US, has done an incredible job of expanding and expanding quickly into these unique markets across the country. I think they're actually in conversations with 72 or so specific markets today. And as they started to bring in, first of all, it was just much more accessible from a value perspective. You're not talking billions and billions of dollars. You're talking in many cases 15 million to $100 million from a value perspective. So it was easier to get into and less frothy. But there was also this strong infrastructure play taking place as well in these secondary cities that wanted to have professional sports and unique sports adjacency to enhance kind of the live, work, play environment of these cities. And I think a lot of that happened after COVID, where people came back and were like, how do we get together in person with other human beings? And what's the best way to do that? And I think that sports has been one of those things that people have looked for. And then you just start to look at some of the big macro themes. The NFL is every year leading all ratings from a television perspective.
Yep.
I think with the advent of AI, people are looking for the unscripted nature of sports. It's real. You don't know what's going to happen when you show up. A lot of other elements of life are getting augmented and very down the rabbit hole of technology, and sports, although there's components of that, is still that I'm going to show up. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm going to leave in 2 or 3 hours and hopefully, have had a thrilling experience. And so I think it was a number of things that really started to, bring focus, especially to outside of the big four type of investments. And then NFL and these leagues allowing private equity, onto the cap table, I think really just opened the floodgates to the way people were thinking about participating in the asset class.
There are a few, I guess they maybe started as a proof of concept and have turned into like the poster children for this type of play. And you can take the Battery in Atlanta as one example.
Yeah.
The Star in Frisco, about 25 minutes north of where I'm sitting. What you see in these districts, and what I've heard you guys describe, you obviously have the anchor of the professional team, the stadium. You have the mixed-use real estate all around it. You have entertainment zones, restaurants, bars. You have actual training facilities where you can have player development and youth, development happening right in the backyard of that professional league, leveraging the ecosystem, using it year-round. What are a few other examples that fall in line with the Battery, the Star, and where do you see, and basically if you can break down why that is such a beautiful
Yeah.
opportunity and flywheel type real estate
Yeah.
example?
I think although it probably could have done better or been designed better, this is coming from the mouth of somebody that was part of the design process. LA Live was one of the first examples, and you saw extreme success with what that created in downtown LA. We think about the Star NRG Stadium in Houston, where from an investment perspective, what you're seeing from a really unique unlock is, let's think about a hotel, right? A hotel that's, maybe in the middle of the city compared to a hotel that's directly adjacent to a stadium in one of these districts. Typically, it's 20 to 40% more valuable being next to the stadium than other premier areas in the same market. So from a real estate development perspective and from a returns perspective, it became very obvious that there was a significant value enhancement, to the real estate being adjacent to the stadium, which was one of the first things that caught our attention. I think it's hard to find a better example than the Battery in Atlanta. I don't fully quote me on this, but if you go back to 2016 and look at the Braves revenue before they made the switch, I think it was 261 million a year. Last year they did $600 million plus in total revenue from the team and from the real estate, with there being a significant lean towards the real estate. And so those are, like, the Battery has just been so well done. It has been such a success. I mean, 10.2 million people go to the Battery complex every year. And I said this on a podcast recently that I did with Marley. It's like 25% of those people are there to see baseball. So
Right.
75% of that are just there to, you know, eat, drink, socialize, go to the music venue, live, go to work.
Yeah.
It's just remarkable. And I think that you're seeing it a lot more. You're seeing the mindset shift here in Europe, where there's been some very large scale projects, with some of the best clubs in the world. But now second division, third division teams in these various leagues, I'm getting a lot of deal flow that is, it used to be, can you get promoted to generate returns? And now it's, how do you build real estate? How do you monetize the stadium on an annual basis to actually create a better roster to give you the chance to be promoted and have the revenue to do that, but to also mitigate the risk of a promotion relegation system that exists and typically where teams are losing money. So I think you innately called out some of the best projects that do exist, but in 5 years, 6 years, you're going to see that this is likely the standard more than the exception.
Give us a list of a couple of secondary markets that people probably don't have on their radar, but that are actually either already have them or are on the verge of having these thriving sports centric ecosystems. I heard in a conversation that you had with Marley, Omaha,
Yeah.
Nebraska is an example. What are a few others?
Omaha, Nebraska, Charleston, South Carolina. Many people don't think of that as a sports city. What you've seen the USL do in Vermont, playing in a 5,000 seat high school football stadium. They are selling that out each and every week. It's an incredible environment. Who would have ever thought that soccer would have taken off like that in a state like Vermont? Boise, Idaho. You think of Boise State, obviously. You don't think of much professional sports there. They are currently in process of building a stadium. From a USL perspective, Brent, it is happening literally everywhere. Albuquerque, New Mexico was one incredible example. I mean, in Albuquerque, maybe they're typically last in every meaningful kind of statistical category when it comes to the US. They always joke like we're 52 out of 50 for basically everything. But if you go to one of their soccer matches, they get 11,000 fans per game. It's an incredible professional sports experience. They're number one in merch in the league or close to number one in merch in the league. And it is very obvious that if they had their own stadium and control their own schedule, it would be a force multiplier for that city. And Albuquerque being the first place where you go, okay, I don't know how we ended up. We own some land in Albuquerque, which is how we connected with the owner of the team. But that was like, wow, if this can work here, and they don't even have their own stadium, imagine what you can do elsewhere. And so another example, a deal that we're looking at right now in Northwest Arkansas. There's not even a core city. It's a bunch of little cities
Yeah.
that make up this region, all off the backs of the Walton family and Walmart, where it seems to make a lot of sense to put a professional sports team there so that University of Arkansas or Arkansas State aren't the only things to go do from a sports perspective. Let me put it this way. You're going to see markets that you probably didn't even know were on the map having professional sports team. And a lot of that is from the initiatives that the USL has.
Well, it's so interesting. Occasionally you get a snapshot into, a single event that does a lot to provide a window into the appetite that a market has for
Yeah.
sports. One example that came to mind as you were talking, I know this isn't Omaha, this is Lincoln, but wasn't there a women's volleyball
Yeah.
game that took place in the Nebraska football stadium and had tens and tens of thousands of people in attendance outside on a beautiful day? It was like that tells you something, one, of how starved people are for sports and how, the desire is certainly there, but that a creative solution and what can be made possible and what people can make happen with the right infrastructure. Even if that was a one-off like exhibition type example.
It's a great example, though. I think they sold out their football stadium. Women's volleyball, there's kind of a competitive landscape right now from an emerging leagues perspective when it comes to volleyball, but it's another example of where you're starting to see real strong professional leagues started in these various sports. I mean, League One volleyball is probably the one that I'm most familiar with.
Yep.
We took a look at that at the end of last year. Timing didn't work out for us, but they have an incredible model where they're rolling up these academy systems, right? And having the academies under the League One volleyball umbrella, but then developing the pro league on top of it. And I think it's a phenomenal business model. If you look at their revenues and their EBITDA, it is clearly a phenomenal business model. But that's before you even get to the real professionalization of the league itself. And there's an appetite. I mean, volleyball in particular, you called out an interesting one. I'm from Orlando. There are thousands and thousands, I mean, tens of thousands of athletes that come through, youth sports athletes that come through Central Florida every year to play at the Wide World of Sports or wherever. But at the convention center in Orlando, I mean, at one time, you'll have 10,000 volleyball players playing there in tournaments. So I think it's a sport that's going to continue to blow up. I think that what you saw at Nebraska could happen in other places. It's just Lincoln in particular is very starved for entertainment. And, Omaha itself with the College World Series with the Omaha soccer team, that is moving up currently and has plans to move up. When you think about cities that are looking to create really strong live work play environments and are willing to create a strong public private relationship, you're just seeing a lot more of that desire, in particular in those secondary markets, because that's what the community wants.
When you think about a secondary market, and you just mentioned a bunch of the emerging leagues. I mean, the Snow League is something really interesting. Sean White's snowboard thing that
Yeah.
I talked to Ben Gardner about that one. Will Ventures is an investor there. It's very easy on a PowerPoint or on a whiteboard to think about if this core product, being the emerging league itself, works. The extensions of revenue and ways to make money off of media and community and youth development and gear and merchandise and all this stuff is pretty endless. That said, there has been this big rush of emerging leagues in the last few years. Some have done better than others. I think if I'm up to date, like the UFL, for example, is struggling quite a bit.
Mhm.
They're not all going to be home runs. How do you guys approach that? Because you don't want to be jumping in when it's too late and it's totally proven, but you
Yeah.
also, I don't think that your strategy is to look at things like venture investments when it comes to a full league. We can talk about your SPV strategy next, but I'm sure the herd will get culled in some form, and
Yeah.
disproportionate gains will accrue to the leader in the category, as always. Yeah, tell me how you think through that.
To be honest, it was something that we were absorbing when we hadn't fully dialed in on what our specific thesis would be. And, for example, John Elway, Bobby Hennebree, they're investors and partners in Sale GP. We think that's
Hmm.
an incredible business model.
Is that Larry
Obviously,
Ellison backed? Sorry to
I
interrupt you.
was, I was about to say, when you have Larry Ellison as the founder, it gives you a lot of horsepower,
Yeah, yeah,
and sophistication and comfort as an investor.
right.
That model didn't work for us because we're so real estate driven today. But I think what we did is we processed these emerging leagues. I think there are definitely investable assets in these emerging leagues. I still go back to Unrivaled as just having extreme success out of the gate. We'll see if there's any challenges with a league like that has its kind of core sport in the WNBA, and then you have players that are WNBA players coming to Unrivaled. My question would be, when there's a collective bargaining agreement, is there something that stops these players from then going and playing in Unrivaled as a part of that collective bargaining agreement, which could be this interesting risk, and that's an aside. But for us, we are much more private equity style investors. That's who we want to be today, and so the emerging leagues, although interesting, and I think very investable at this stage, it just doesn't fit the model for what we're looking for. And really, investing just generally into sports wasn't appealing to us. It was very much the marriage of institutional commercial real estate
Hmm.
paired with sport
Hmm.
that gave us the conviction to actually go out and pursue building an investment management platform to thematically attack it. We got to the point where it was very obvious that from a risk perspective, from a return profile perspective, from a return timeline perspective, and the dual nature of the OpCo and PropCo, it gave you the longer term hold opportunity on the OpCo and team side. And you were driving value to that by the real estate development that you were doing, and vice versa. I haven't even had, Brent, many conversations over the last 8 months with emerging leagues in sports because the market kind of knows where our focus is.
Hmm.
But for us, there's so much opportunity in the space that we're focused on at the moment. And we've got a pipeline of 70 plus opportunities globally that we're really working through minimizing down to a few. And it just didn't make sense from a time perspective. Now, with that being said, we're not naive enough to think that our funnel will not widen back up and open back up. And there will be unique opportunities that we will pursue in the future, not out of the fund one, but as Momentous, that may be an emerging league or sport adjacent technology,
Hmm.
fan experience technology, in venue, out of venue technology, et cetera. Like, we will widen back out, but right now we're just focused on hitting base hits and line drives with our current thesis, and executing really well. But I think there's a lot of risk, but there's also a lot of upside, with where sports are going generally.
So you talked about the global opportunity. Let's go there. You're sitting in Berlin, Germany. How
Yeah.
did you specifically end up there, of all places? And as a two-part question here, Europe gets a lot of hate when it comes to their anti-business posture and hyper-regulatory disposition,
Yeah.
I think you could say.
Yeah.
Um,
It's one way to
how,
say it.
yeah, it's a shame. But how have you experienced that, and why Berlin?
So I came over here back in 2009 after college to play semi-professional football is really what it was. I did get paid, but very good high school football at the time. So super fun. And that got me familiar with Europe generally. I went on to play in Moscow, which was a crazy experience. And we could take up an entire
Yeah.
episode of a podcast just focused on my Moscow experience and having to flee the country and it's craziness.
All right. Before you
Um,
even keep going, we're gonna have to book that one for a few months from now. That's a solo pod. It sounds like that's its own
all
podcast.
based around sport. I moved there to play, but then I moved there to start an international football league.
Wow.
So we can sidebar that for the
We'll
future.
reserve, we'll reserve that one.
And then in Poland, I played as well. So I had a comfort level with Europe generally, with the culture, with the dynamics, with the language, et cetera, et cetera. But when I co-founded Nestry, an organization called Lead Sports, which is an acronym for Legacy of Adi Dassler, the gentleman who founded Adidas, they have a family of investment funds. And one of their funds invested into the startup and brought us into their accelerator. And my now fiance, who's their chief innovation officer, was running the accelerator at the time. So
Mm.
we fell in love through the end of that process. Fairly taboo, like seriously, it was right at the end of the accelerator. And then, the Lord blessed us and we found out, quite quickly that she was pregnant. And in October of 21, which is when we learned that news, just with the way that I was raised in a family of strong men, there was no chance on earth that I was not going to be with my child. And then fortunately, I was deeply in love with her, Natalie. And we thought that it just made the most sense to start the family here in Berlin, where she was born and raised, and where we have a strong kind of family unit here and support. Not that we don't have that in Orlando. I'm quite blessed to have a big family in Orlando, but it just made the most sense for a number of reasons to be over here. I moved here right before I started leaning in more with Magnolia Hill Partners. So I'd be dishonest if I told you that it's the perfect work scenario today. It does provide us some advantages in the European market as it relates to deal flow and relationships,
Yep.
but I am working a US time zone from Berlin, which is 6 hours most of the time. So there's challenges with that, and there's a little bit extra that I have to carry on my shoulders. However, it's a great city, great people, very interesting history. To your point, very challenging from a regulatory perspective. You see a lot of founders and early stage companies moving their operations to the Middle East because it's just
Mhm.
so much more business friendly. And then from a sports perspective, Germany is very tough to invest in, especially in soccer, because of the 50+1 rule, where you can actually own the team on paper, but you don't make any of the decisions because the board of the fans and the board of the managing director of the team actually control the day-to-day decision making. And so it's not very advantageous for outside capital. So I'm hoping that changes one day because I'm sitting right here in the middle of it all.
Mhm.
But that's how we ended up, or how I ended up in Berlin.
How much of Momentous's activity do you foresee out of this first fund taking place internationally?
Probably 25 to 30%. There is a lot of activity in Europe right now. Obviously, a lot of that is in soccer
Hmm.
or football. In the last 60 days, European basketball has become very salient. The NBA announcing that they want to have an NBA Europe. There's a lot of activity around which cities will that be. I think Berlin is on the list, London's on the list, and then naturally Paris and others. So we started to see more deal flow from like the EuroLeague teams or the local country teams in these leagues that aren't necessarily positioning themselves to be the expansion team from the NBA, but to build off the momentum of the capital that will be flowing in and the activity that will be flowing in from the NBA level. So for us, we'd be naive not to be focused over here. And so I think that's probably 30% of our fund. Don't quote me on that, but it may shake out a little bit more, a little bit less. What I do know is that what has become so normalized in the US from a mixed use sports district, I think is probably just really arriving over here, where the future of this strategy 5 to 10 years from now, you'll see a lot more of live, work, play ecosystems and environments here in Europe that don't currently exist. Actually, Berlin has one of the very few great mixed use districts around a arena, Uber Arena. We know that we're ahead of the curve and that we are very excited about having a lot of relationships here as local city councils, if you're in England, or different city management groups across Europe in general are starting to catch on to, wow, this is what this ecosystem like this can do for our cities and our communities that in many cases are stagnant from a economic perspective.
The Paris Musketeers are a team in playing American football in Europe, and Yogi Roth
Yeah.
is a good friend of mine. He was on the pod a couple episodes ago. He's a part owner of that team. He's all fired up about it.
I was the assistant offensive coordinator for the Berlin Thunder in the European League of Football. The first year that I moved here, and a little bit the second year, and then my U.S. time zone work schedule just kind of eliminated my ability to go to practice. But you are seeing, first of all, in Germany, Berlin has an NFL game coming here in 2 weeks, next weekend maybe. You could actually get tickets for that game, but the last 2 years, tickets to a game in Germany sold out in 2 minutes. 4 to 500,000 people in the Ticketmaster waiting room trying to get their hands on a ticket.
Oh my gosh.
Uh, Unbelievable fan base for American football here. Bjorn Werner, who was an All-American at Florida State, defensive end, first round pick to the Colts, I think 17th overall pick. This is like maybe 14, 15 or so. He was born and raised in Berlin. He is basically who I call the Pat McAfee of Germany. They have a great podcast, very funny and informative.
Uh-huh.
Probably a great guy to have on the pod someday.
No doubt.
Um, they've brought a lot of attention, a lot of education in a comical way to the population. And the NFL is really pursuing flag football over here. I know that Berlin got a $1.5 million investment from the NFL, or an associated organization from the NFL, to continue to grow the flag football ecosystem here. The European League of Football, which is who the Paris Musketeers play in, there's some fragmentation that's happening right now due to who is running and managing the league at the European League of Football level. But what I will say is it is by far the most professional environment that you have for American football, in my opinion, outside the US and Canada. And, the good teams get 30,000 people at games. Here in Berlin, we got 8 to 10. It's a great experience for players to land after they're done playing in college. There's 4 Americans that are allowed on each team, so it's limited. You see a lot of guys try to stay in the league once they're here. But Yogi and those guys, I think they had Jack Del Rio as their coach this year.
Exactly.
You've seen Norm Chow come over here as an offensive coordinator. Jim Tomsula was a head coach for the Ryan Fire here. What it's turned out to be, which is incredible, a lot of these coaches who have created their wealth, coaching the NFL or college, they go, wait, I can go coach football in the summer in Europe, only have to be there 8 months out of the year. My wife can have, or my partner can have, an incredible European experience.
Yeah.
We only practice 3 days a week. There's not the same stress level or microscope.
Yeah.
But I think it's just an indication of where American football is going to continue to grow globally. And I think the expansion of these games that you're seeing in Brazil and Mexico, over here in Europe, are just, have created a lot of that excitement.
No, I'm sure those coaches love it. That is a wild stat you had about the wait list for tickets for that Berlin game.
So insane.
I love seeing whenever there's an NFL international game, when they pan to the crowd and everyone's just wearing random NFL player jerseys from like all 32 teams. There's something about it. It's so genuine. They're just happy to be there, and now it's come to them, and it's awesome.
Yeah. I was at the London Jaguars Rams game 2 weeks ago, which was a terrible game. Rams destroyed them. But it was like, there was just football fans.
Yeah.
Like,
right.
now Jacksonville's been there long enough that, you have some natural Jacksonville contingency, but people do love the sport. And I think what's happened is social media and content creators and podcasters have helped bring down the barrier to entry from a knowledge of the game, a knowledge of the rules. Like, it took a long time. As a former player, I don't know all the rules still.
Right.
Like in 2009, when I was playing in Dresden, Germany, when Twitter was barely out, Facebook had been around for a few years, like, you just didn't have the way to educate the population. And now there's ways to do that. And I think that's turned people onto the sport.
You mentioned a few answers ago about how without a more focused approach, investing in sports generally was not very appealing. Also, what does that even mean? It's like that's tough to really quantify what is considered sport, what's not. There are all the extensions of it. But at the end of the day, it is the glue, the connective tissue that does make these things cohesive, whether it's, like you're saying, the mixed-use real estate, the entertainment districts, training centers, technology around a stadium. I mean, I talked to Marcus Colston earlier this season, and Champion Venture Partners, his group, he did a really nice job of explaining the value chain of sports. And it's a very long chain, but ranging from real estate and stadiums and things that you've outlined today, obviously team ownership, and then things that people don't even realize are happening all around them when you have 100,000 people in a stadium on a weekly basis. Parking, security, like all of the technology that spans across the board. It feels kind of endless, and it feels like as a firm, you almost have to put a fence around it so that you don't go chasing shiny objects.
Yeah.
Within that value chain, just to restate it, where does it start and where does it end for you guys? If you have to kind of define it in Fund One, and then where do you want to continue to have access and opportunity and hang around the hoop to do SPVs?
In Fund One, it starts with, is there a team, right? Is there a professional sports team in some league where we are comfortable with the league structure and have confidence in that league's viability, not just for 5 years, but for 50 years?
Mm-hmm.
It starts there. And then, is that team currently, are they playing in a stadium that they control? Do they get to make that, for lack of a bad term here, do they get to make that asset sweat
Mm-hmm.
365 days a year?
Yeah.
If they don't, okay, there's an opportunity to develop a stadium. And obviously we're typically being approached with that as a, something they want to do. So it goes from, okay, we got individual team. If we get them in their own stadium, how does that unlock the enterprise value? From there, the next step is there some level of mixed use real estate development around it? Now that is variable based on the project. Some projects have a hotel, 100 multifamily units, whether that be built for rent or what we typically know as apartments. Is there some level of entertainment and F&B that you can provide to that ecosystem? Not everything is going to be the Battery. Not everything is going to be like Sporting Jacks, where we have between 70 and 90 acres to develop. A lot of what you see in Europe is 18 acres, 20 acres, but there's significant value in the land, where a team's controlling their own stadium and have never thought about like hosting concerts or hosting community events, other sports, rugby, American football, etc. And that's where it stops today in Fund One. Now, Marcus is right. Like, there are so many other adjacent technologies that you are then perhaps able to amplify by
Yep.
investing in them and then rolling them into your portfolio companies, and really adding value right away. We will get to that point. We will make select investments there, and those would likely be, at least at this stage, an SPV investment, where we're saying, hey, we love this business. In any other circumstance, this is an investment that we would want to make. And we know that we can drive significant value there by bringing it into our ecosystem and adding new clients or new users or whatever it may be, through that kind of turnkey ability to basically integrate it. The other side of the SPV, so that's kind of the value chain for us. Like, I've thought through the lens of a quarterback, and I've said, I don't want to get on the field and throw a bunch of picks until I thoroughly know the game plan. And the game
Yeah.
plan that we know right now is how to invest in teams, how to develop stadiums, and the real estate around it. And we're not going to get outside of that game plan. We're gonna execute that in a meaningful way. But from an SPV perspective, outside of that middle market, without naming the team, because Major League Baseball has robust NDAs, we were a part of a transaction that recently took place in the purchase of a Major League Baseball team. We backed out at the 11th hour for a few reasons. And so in that case, we would generate an SPV, because for us, it had the team and then the proposed real estate. We would have raised our hands and said, hey, we'll put together an SPV. We'll manage and raise that SPV. And we're going to go participate in this investment that still meets our general thesis, but that's just at a much larger scale than the type of investments we're typically making. So we think of, okay, if there's unique opportunities where there's the right relationships, great partners, great operators, we're always looking for great operators. We do not want to operate a sports team today, going back to the playbook. Maybe in 5 to 7 years, we can execute that and throw a bunch of touchdowns. Right now, I don't want to do that. We don't want to do that. So those SPV opportunities, maybe we would have done a sale GP in the future. Maybe would have done Unrivaled in the future or something similar, where we're able to get conviction, where we think it's additive to the overall ecosystem. This is such a relationship industry. And we have the mindset, like, we want to do business and life with people that we really enjoy. We have a no a-hole rule. So we're always kind of looking for that. So that's how we would think about the SPVs. But if there were a technology that goes on a cleat or goes under a seat in a stadium that was just too good to pass up, then perhaps we pursue that via SPV. For the near term, we're focused on just investing out of the fund in that team and intersection of real estate.
In the near term, what is it that has you most fired up right now when you get out of bed in the morning that you just can't wait to attack with your newly launched vehicle in Momentous Sports?
It's a great question. Number one, I really love team building. And so we've been adding a lot of I should say we've been adding a few new members to the team at Momentous. We added a new managing director of investments. We added a new team member on the capital markets side. I get fired up about bringing people into this space. I mean, there's not a lot in my background today, if you just look at my resume or CV, that said Kyle's going to be an institutional finance guy. It's been relationships. It's been willingness to get out of my comfort zone. Work through imposter syndrome, learn on the fly, that has led me to this seat today. And I love the idea of, opening up those opportunities to others and bringing them into a space that I think is super exciting and something we can really do for the next 30 or 40 years. That's one side of it. Number two, fundraising is tough. It's a contact sport in and of itself, but you generate and create so many incredible relationships through that process. And so, although it's tough in my environment, being in Berlin, because that's such a shake hand, meet, build trust, type of engagement, I do enjoy the fundraising process. And then, really, what I really love about this space is the team owners themselves who we're
Mm,
partnering and backing. Because typically, and especially where our focus are, these people have been successful somewhere else in business, have created wealth for themselves, and now are, owning, managing, running a professional sports organization. And people that have the balls to do that are typically really unique humans and individuals in and of themselves. And I've had incredible relationships, even on deals we've passed on, be built with these team operators and owners who are often saying, "Hey, we know how to run the team. We need some more capital,
yeah.
but we really need help in the ideation around what we should be doing from a real estate perspective. And we need somebody to help us by rolling up their sleeves and being active and involved." And that's where we want to fit in and add value. And so I love the relationship building on the team ownership side. And then lastly, like, sports are fun. Like, we're investing in like a kid's game. It can get very serious and talk about EBITDA and returns and exit scenarios and all these various things that the fiduciary side of your responsibility is required to process and make decisions based off of. But hell, I'm waking up every day, you know, investing in sports. I didn't know. I was in my 20s, I was running 15 restaurants. I was a restaurateur in the hospitality space. Like, 10 years later, to be in the sports asset class, helping grow the future of various sports globally. Like, how can you not want to get out of bed for something like that as a former athlete and as somebody that grew up in sports? So there's really a couple things that excite me. It's not hard to get out of bed, other than having an 8-week old and a 3-year old daughter that create some sleep challenges. But those are the things that I'm excited about. And our podcast that we're doing, the Momentous Sports podcast, I wanted to just open access to the ecosystem, talk on a very basic level, have it be as educational but as entertaining as possible. And so I've enjoyed doing the podcast as well, because I think there are a lot of people that are interested in what sports as an asset class actually means, who, just deserve a peek under the hood. Like, how does this work? Where are the players? Like, a lot of the work you're doing right on this podcast, like providing people with that additional layer of expertise and insight into something that we kind of watch through competition. But this industry is a behemoth, and it is only going to continue to get bigger. And I love the idea of just making it approachable more than anything.
I love it. Thank you so much. I really want to stay in touch. I'm not going to forget to hit you up for a Moscow American
Yeah.
football episode at some point in the next couple months, maybe. But thank you so much for spending an hour with me. It was awesome. So I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Brian. Kudos to you and what you're doing. I think it's fantastic work. I think, it's very entertaining, the two podcasts that I watched prior to joining you. So keep up the great work. And, if there's anything that we can ever do for you, don't be afraid to holler. And if you're over in Germany, let's get a pint together.